Hello everybody. The situation is strange. For 4 years now, Ukraine has been fighting very successfully and holding the Russians back at great cost. The West watches calmly. Actions, concrete measures, countermeasures continue to be delayed. My name is Christoph Müller. I make videos for Ukraine and for democracy here on YouTube. By the way, the war in Ukraine has been going on since 2014. Just a reminder. Russia had already invaded Ukraine in 2014, annexed Crimea and declared the Donbas to be independent people's republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. At that time, Angela Merkel, together with her foreign minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, now president of the German Federal Republic, forced a completely disadvantageous peace agreement on Ukraine, Minsk I and Minsk II. To resolve the Ukraine crisis, it was said that it was important for President Putin to be able to save face. And Russia was presented as a mediator, as a country that was supposedly not a party to the war. With this lie, Putin got away. The frightened Westerners swallowed all of Putin's lies and demands and pretended to accept that Russia was not a party to the war, and that the puppets controlled by Russia were independent Ukrainian freedom fighters. That was 2014. A cartoon by Heiko Sakurai from that time illustrates it very well, pretending that the aggressor's lie is not a lie but a legitimate opinion. That is a recurring mistake we see again and again. And we will continue to see it. The speed at which these lies spread and the willingness to accept them as opinions is naturally increasing. It's the principle of the fairy tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. If you don't know this story, I made a video about it. Briefly, the principle is this. A ruler can tell any nonsense and eventually even believe it himself, or at least pretend to believe it. The boundaries blur. At the same time, we see in Germany and Europe that the situation in Ukraine is getting worse and worse. The Russians are destroying Ukraine's heating and power plants every day. Often, the entire country is plunged into blackout at temperatures of minus 20 degrees Celsius or worse. Recently, an elderly woman froze to death in her apartment in Kiev. She had survived the Holocaust. But not Putin's war of annihilation is in the harsh continental winter. The helpers slipped on the ice and we watch. But this is not only happening in Ukraine, it's happening here as well. Because of inaction and disinformation, a government has unbelievably returned to power in the United States that functions like a wrecking ball against democracy. 77 million Americans elected Donald Trump president of the United States for the second time. That is like putting a loaded gun into the hands of a 3-year-old. He has no idea what he is doing, but he considers himself very important and can cause enormous damage to others and in the end to himself as well. He will never understand how it all happened, but he will feel the consequences only when it is too late. The problem is always the time delay. You only notice the effects of a bad decision much later, if you notice them at all. The principle of boil the frog, is it? You know it. We can observe it with the British as well, who decided 10 years ago to leave the European Union. They called it Brexit, and it took 10 years to carry out that Brexit. And then it will take another 10 years for them to admit the mistake. The country is not better off, it's worse. There are no fewer migrants, but more. Trade with the European Union has declined sharply. It will take 10 years before they rejoin the European Union, if the European Union still will exist by then. Behind Brexit, as behind so many evils in this world, were the Russians. The Russians are vicious catalysts. Through mass agitation, for example via Cambridge Analytica in the case of Brexit, they flooded social media with posts, keyword, the St. Petersburg troll factory. They supported the main Brexit propagandist Nigel Farage. then as now. His party was called UKIP at that time. Today it's called Reform UK. And Nigel Farage has an excellent chance of winning the election. Another Putin friend in power in a European country will this be. Or take France. Here is a far-right party. It's used to be called Front National, founded by Jean-Marie Le Pen. His daughter Marine Le Pen took over the party with persistence and Putin's support, built it into an increasingly legitimate and powerful force in France. In 2014, the party received a hefty loan of 9.4 million euros from Putin, openly communicated and staged for media effect. Anti-immigrant slightly softened, another familiar pattern from Putin's playbook. Rebranding. France's party of destruction is now called Rassemblement National, the National Rally. The French, by the way, are not so squeamish in dealing with the far right as the Germans are, and its figurehead Marine Le Pen was barred from holding public office by court order. Now a young man is at the head of the party, Jordan Bardella. Perhaps a placeholder until Marine's ban expires, I assume. Jordan Bardella has realistic chances in the presidential elections next year. In April 2027, in the polls, he leads with 35 to 37%. And the current president has only 14%, which brings us to Germany. The AfD also seems to be rising, the strongest party in Germany in the trends poll. How is this possible that the pro-Putin party will get so much in Germany after the years of war massacre in Ukraine? And it continues to gain more and more support, even threatening to take over the government, which would then be 100% pro-Russian, pro-corruption, pro-crime, anti-human and anti-democratic party in Germany. But I began this speech with Ukraine. The situation is completely absurd. A democratic country, Ukraine, is fighting with weapons and human lives against a fascist dictatorship. Russia, a dictatorship that seeks to erase Ukraine's existence through lies, weapons and human sacrifice. And yet it does not succeed. At the same time, the Western democracies in Europe are still partly in North America sit calmly and watch as we allow our democracy to be dissected alive. The Russians cannot get past Ukraine. It is like a rock. They cannot defeat this country. That is why the Russians have now, with endless persistence, focused on undermining us, Ukraine's allies, the democracies. And one democracy after the other one is tipping over and falling in slow motion at a snail's pace, alive, seemingly unstoppable. One wants to shout, "Wake up!" But that battle cry has already been hijacked by the other side. This is no longer just about missiles, drones, tanks, troops, killing and being killed, about a war of annihilation against civilians in Ukraine. No. It is about us here in the West. It is about us who have retreated into the roles of observers. It is about the battle between lies and truth. And we have wasted an enormous amount of precious time. 4 full years of a total war of annihilation against Ukraine. Our Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has still not approved the Taurus missiles he promised, which is, by the way, why I voted for him. Very disappointing. So, Mr. Merz, finally deliver the Taurus missiles to Ukraine and order these weapons on a large scale. Doing nothing only makes everything worse and more expensive. Please don't repeat the Scholz approach. Here I will stop for today. If you want to hear my opinion on why we behave so timidly and hesitantly and why we still stand paralyzed before this problem like a rabbit in front of a snake, feel free to write it in the comments below and I will make another video of it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Many thanks for that. All the best. Stay brave like the Ukrainians. Become brave. Yours, Christoph Müller.